And boom, everybody on the screen. Notably, obviously, Rebel can't be joining us right now. She's got something else that she's having to do in the background, but she will be playing the matchups tonight. So we're going to be asking these three some amazing, hard-hitting questions. And go on, Anu, you can start off this season.
Yeah.
No, it's
well, one thing that we're doing that's really exciting this season is the idea of themes. So every week, for the first 6 weeks, players will be given sort of guidance on what to build, right? And what I did for our players this pod, I sent you each a basically a list of planeswalkers, and you all came today with 2 decks each. Now, I'd maybe like to talk to each of you and figure out, when you saw the problem, how did you decide what deck to play, whether you chose to brew a little bit, whether you chose to play something very stock, very strong. So, Andreas, let's go ahead and start with you. What are your decks today? And tell me how you came about them.
Yeah, so first of all, it was kind of a no-brainer that I wanted to honor Kai Bude over because of the news on the weekend. So it was pretty clear I would just take his deck from the PT and play with that, given it also checked the boxes of the criteria you guys gave us. And then for the other deck, I chose Boros Energy. It was kind of cool. It's themed in my country's flag's colors. So yeah, it did well at the PT. I think a Turkish player did extremely well with that deck. So I didn't brew too much. I mainly just thoroughly picked some good ones as my weapons of choice.
Lead machine. I love it. Arya, how about you? You've got some pretty cool stuff cooking in the kitchen.
Yeah, so I kind of got a mix of 2 things. I was busy moving this week, so I didn't get to do quite as much brewing as I'd normally like to do. So one of the decks I brought was Mono Black Necrodominance, which is pretty close to Noama's list from the PT and pretty stock. And then the other thing I wanted to do is in their testing for the Pro Tour, I know Sanctum came up with this really sweet Sultai Nadu list that leans on Chthonian Nightmare and tries to do loops that way. It's pretty different from the way any of the other Nadu decks play, and I really wanted to give that a whirl, and it seemed like a perfect home for Grist. So I thought, well, if I can't do 2 brews, I can at least bring 1 tuned brew, even if that brew is someone else's rather than mine.
I think that's actually really cool. I did see the list. Everyone else, you can catch the list on moxfield.com/MTGO. Very simple URL. And then Doomwake, I think you also brought Necro too, right? But this is obviously, so going back a little bit, when I say Necro, I mean you're also playing it alongside the Planeswalker that you were assigned, which was Sorin, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I basically just took Seth Manfield's list because I've been playing a lot of the mono black deck ever since the Pro Tour happened this past weekend, and I'm a pretty big fan of Seth's list with 4 One Ring and 4 Necro, just more of those card draw engines with all the pitch spells. So I basically just took Seth's list, cut some random cards for 4 Sorins, didn't do a ton of brewing or anything. And then for the second Planeswalker, I had a Johnny, and I was a really big fan of Ken Yukihiro's Mardu energy list, which is very, very similar to the Boros list, but with a very light black splash for Orcish Bowmasters and Chthonian Nightmare. And that is what I'm deciding to play, because Nightmare, really good with the Johnny.
Yeah, I recall hearing, or I think I saw a tweet from Seth Manfield. It's funny that you brought him up, that he was like, if Nadu gets banned, which, all right, well, that's a whole conversation we'll dig into later in today's episode. Necro might be one of the best decks, in the format, or the best deck in the format. So curious to see how it goes today. We're going to get a lot of matches, a good diversity of pulls. For people who are wondering, I believe Rebel also brought Boros Energy with Ajani, but then also a very spicy Tameo, I believe, Affinity Brew. So that's one deck that I'm actually looking out for as well. Will, do you have any other questions for our competitors before we go into the match?
Yeah, I've got some notes here. This one's for Doomwake. How does it feel to be the person that made Nadu a deck in Modern, and now everybody is not happy with you? Have you got any words to say to the people, any responses to this, my friend?
Any comments regarding Nadu can be directed towards my lawyer. That's all I'm going to say.
No, my real question is, obviously, we're playing each week. You're playing against small pods. Small pod of 4 people pods each week. We give you a theme, so you've got some direction of what possibly players could be, but how are you kind of brewing your decks for that? How are you tailoring your sideboards to not only a small person pod, but also a kind of a small bracket of decks that they can bring? They know it's going to be an MH3 Planeswalker. You just don't know which ones it is that they're going to bring. How are we making these decisions in your sideboard? Why am I with you, Doom? Let's carry on. You first, bud.
It's interesting because if you kind of look at the planeswalkers, there's a limited pool of decks that can actually have that those cards can go into, right? Like Ajani is mostly in the energy decks, Sorin is mostly in black-based mid-range decks, Ral is basically exclusively for storm combo. So you kind of have a slightly better idea of the kind of the pool of decks that people are going to play. And funny enough, I thought that nobody could play Storm because I forgot about Ral. And then after I built my sideboards, I was like, oh, Ral. Okay, so we have to put the Storm hate back in. But yeah, it is a little bit different.
Sweet. Let's go next up, Arya.
Yeah, I was in a pretty similar spot where, I mean, part of the whole like constraints on deck building with teams means there's less room to metagame than there was in previous seasons. So I was pretty locked in terms of like what decks I wanted to play. It was more in terms of what sideboard slots are dedicated and how prepped I was for matchups. And again, Ruby Storm is the one deck that is like very clearly buildable with the constraints we have in mind. It's a deck very clearly themed around Rel, so I made sure I was pretty well prepared for that, which it turns out was not entirely necessary. So we'll see how it goes.
And then last up, Andreas. Looks like everybody's gunning for your deck, my friend. How are you kind of dealing with that, and also how do you deal with your sideboard cards of choice?
Yeah, so first of all, I really like these like gimmicks because Magic to me is an art form. So you have many ways to express yourself, and this really just adds another layer to that. So I really enjoy these small whatever challenges or whatever you want to call it. Sideboard wise, I didn't go as deep, but I guess my Storm deck was kind of predictable with, I mean, if they didn't get assigned Ral, then probably somebody else in the pod did. And what are my options really? But the cool thing about this is not only just playing to win, this is also showcasing cool new cards and having fun with my peers. So yeah, this is definitely a multi-edged sword, this MTGO Masters. So yeah, I'm just looking forward.
Especially, you just literally just described MTGO Masters in one shot. That is exactly what it is. Next question, Nadu.
Oh, actually, I was going to ask one question to everybody, not just myself and the people here, but viewers in the chat. Are we ready to watch the first match?